Today we are testing out a few options for vegan pulled pork. We're going to be doing tofu, mushrooms, and jackfruit. I'm also going to try cooking them in a pan as well as in the oven to see what the best option is. I'm going to compare the taste, texture, price, and convenience, so let's get it going. Now for pulled pork, we need a seasoning blend and barbecue sauce. I'm going to be using some store-bought sauce today, but if you want to make some from scratch, I have a recipe on my Western bacon cheeseburger from a few weeks back. For the dry rub, I'm going to throw together something real quick. We're going to do a 1/4 cup each of white sugar and brown sugar, an entire 1/2 cup of smoked paprika, 1 tablespoon mustard powder, 1 tablespoon onion powder, 2 tablespoons garlic powder, 2 teaspoons ground ginger, 2 teaspoons oregano, 2 tablespoons nutritional yeast, an optional tablespoon of chipotle powder, 1 tablespoon of cumin, 1/2 teaspoon of citric acid, and then salt to taste. I'm doing 2 teaspoons and some black pepper to taste. Mix that up and that is your dry rub. And this does make a lot, so feel free to half the recipe. And now let's do the tofu first. I'm using super firm as I often do since it doesn't need to be pressed. You could also use extra firm and press it for 30 minutes or so, but this block cost me around $4 at Whole Foods, though I think you can get it cheaper at Trader Joe's or Sprouts. To prepare this, I'm simply going to grate it. Oh, and please get one of these gloves. They are a knuckle saver and my anxiety around grating things has dropped to 0%. But once grated, I'm going to simply add it to a preheated pan with a bit of oil. And now I'm just testing out a small batch, about 1 small sandwich worth, since I usually oven bake these first to dry them out and give them a meatier texture and then rehydrate them to get them juicy again, so I wasn't quite sure what to expect by just putting them straight in the pan. After they've gotten browned a bit, I'm going to go ahead and add in some of that dry rub that we made. We're going to stir that around and then I'm going to drizzle in about 2 to 3 tablespoons worth of that barbecue sauce. Stir that to coat and cook a bit to caramelize it a bit, and that is basically it. And now let's throw together a quick sandwich. I'm going to get a toasted bun, lay down a little vegan mayo, our tofu pulled pork, some pickles, maybe a bit more barbecue sauce, and our top bun. And this was actually pretty delicious. The texture doesn't really remind me of pulled pork. It's more similar to like a sloppy joe, but it's tofu seasoned and slathered in barbecue sauce, so it's pretty delicious. Now let's see if oven baking is necessary. So I'm going to add the rest of my grated tofu to a bowl, cover it in about 1 to 2 tablespoons worth of oil and about 1 tablespoon of the dry rub. We're going to mix that up with clean hands and then taste it a bit and decide to throw in 1 more tablespoon of the dry rub. Next to a parchment lined baking sheet, I'm going to add the tofu, spread it out as best as I can, and then bake that for 25 to 30 minutes at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is what it looks like after that. And it's pretty dry and chewy, so we're going to go ahead and rehydrate it like we usually do. So into a preheated pan it goes. We're going to stir that around. I'm going to add in some barbecue sauce, maybe a bit more than 1/2 cup or so. Just do as much as your barbecue sauce love and heart desires. We're going to stir that to coat, and I decided I was going to need to reduce it, so I'm going to add in about 1/2 cup of water as well. We're going to cook that down on medium heat until it looks something like that. And now let's give this one a taste test. And I'm going to be building all these sandwiches pretty much the same way. And honestly, the texture of this one was slightly better, but to be honest, I would be happy with the first one that we made just in the pan. Especially if you just want to whip one of these up in like less than 10 minutes after a hard day at work, I would say just throw the tofu in the pan and brown it. I'm not sure how that will work with the extra firm, even if it's pressed, but with the super firm, you can definitely go the quick and easy route and get great results. All right, next let's do some king oyster mushrooms. And I found these at Whole Foods and they were kind of expensive at $9 for 8 ounces. They're also some of the biggest and girthiest mushrooms I've ever seen. But let's go ahead and shred them up. And this was the second time I've tried doing this and I had slightly better luck than last time. Once shredded, I'm going to do a small batch test in a dry pan. And these mushrooms, they were still pretty chewy. As I've heard and feared, pan frying won't really tenderize them. They were just way too chewy just in the pan. So we're going to go ahead and bake these, and I'm going to be doing the same thing as the tofu, tossing them in some oil and dry rub, and then adding them to a baking sheet and baking at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for about 30 minutes. And after that, this is what they look like. They've shrunk down quite a bit, but they are much less chewy, and now I think they're gonna work. But first, into a pan, we're going to cover them in some barbecue sauce and cook them down for about 5 to 10 minutes. And to me, they look absolutely delicious, and I couldn't wait to throw them on a sandwich, so let's go ahead and do that. And obviously, if you want to top these with coleslaw or onions or whatever, by all means, I just wanted to keep it simple for these taste tests. But now let's take a bite, and I gotta say that first bite totally blew me away. Like, this was as good as anything I've gotten at a vegan barbecue restaurant or even a non-vegan one. The mushrooms are just so meaty and flavorful on their own, but then when you add that barbecue sauce, and holy moly, just totally amazing. So I highly recommend if you can get your hands on these mushrooms. All right, last but not least is jackfruit, and you want to get the young jackfruit in water or brine and not syrup, and this can cost me around $4. To prep the jackfruit, I'm just going to drain and wash it off, and then at first I was going to cut it up, but then I decided to just smush it with my fingers to try to replicate the pulled pork texture better. And I used the whole jackfruit, the core and the seeds, but if you want to discard those, go for it. And now for the pan test, we're going to do as we've done, just about 1 sandwich worth in a little bit of oil, and then get some color on it and add in some of that dry rub. Then we're going to do some of the barbecue sauce, and for this jackfruit, I really only cooked it for about 10 minutes or so. And next we'll do it on a bun with our pickles and mayo, and this was just absolutely phenomenal as well. I would say that the texture reminded me the most of pulled pork, even more than the mushrooms. Though the mushrooms tasted better in my opinion, this was still pretty dang good and amazing and highly recommended. And of course, I had to test them out getting baked in the oven as well, so I baked them at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 25 minutes, and this is what they looked like after that. Next, we gotta pan fry them and drench them in some barbecue sauce, of course. And now we can taste test this one, and I gotta say, very similar to the tofu as far as the difference in texture and taste when simply pan frying versus oven baking. It's definitely better, but if you want something quicker, then I think pan frying them will totally work as well. But either way, this one does a great job of scratching that pulled pork itch. So which one is best? Well, it's hard to say, but let's take a look at the pros and cons of each. For price, here's 4 cups of each option. On the left is jackfruit. This is 3 cans worth, so the price is around $12 for all of it. I would say it makes about 4 to 6 sandwiches depending on the size. And as we saw, the jackfruit is easy to prepare and it soaks up the flavors of the rub and the barbecue sauce well, and the texture is great at mimicking pulled pork. So overall, it is a great option, possibly my favorite one. In the middle, we have the mushrooms, and that's actually 12 ounces worth, so the cost for me is around $14. They did shrink up quite a bit when baked, so you could really only get about 2 sandwiches worth of meat, maybe 3 if you make smaller sandwiches, so it is a lot pricier for me. I bet you could get them cheaper at an Asian market if you got one. Taste-wise, these were probably my favorite. The texture is pretty outstanding as well, but I do think I like the jackfruit's texture a little bit more. And unlike the tofu or jackfruit, you have to bake these to get them to be tender enough, so they aren't quite as convenient as well. That being said, the sandwich I made was definitely restaurant quality, so if you can get them and have the time to cook them, I say go for it. Last is tofu, which is by far the cheapest, as one block gave me 4 cups of shredded tofu, so the price is $4, a lot cheaper than both jackfruit and the mushrooms. It doesn't shrink too much, so you can get about 4 sandwiches with this batch, maybe more, and like the jackfruit, you can just cook them straight in a pan, so they are pretty convenient. It also has way more protein than either of the jackfruit or the mushrooms, if that kind of thing is important to you. Taste and texture wise, they are probably my least favorite, but that being said, they were still delicious, and if I made a sandwich with them in less than 10 minutes after a busy day at work, I wouldn't be mad at all. So there you go, a decent sized rundown of the most popular vegan options for pulled pork. Let me know what you think, and if you want to make something else with jackfruit, check out my vegan tuna salad video right here, and until then, I'll see you all next time.